Yo, what's good, Spirit Squad? Today we're going to be going over a modern ban list here, and that's going to be something that's been all over Twitter for the past, I don't know, 3 days, 4 days now, and the idea was that Canister and Andrea Mingucci decided to play a couple of decks that have been banned out of Modern for some time now. I think the two decks were Hypergenesis and Splinter Twin, and it turns out that the two decks weren't really oppressing what Modern is currently doing. They jammed those two decks against some of Modern's best decks right now, and the decks that are being played in Modern right now actually did most of the winning. So here we're going to be taking a look at a tier list of all of the Modern banned cards, and we're going to see exactly which ones we think could safely be unbanned, which ones should never be unbanned, and which ones kind of lie in between. Looking forward to checking that out with y'all. I'll see y'all in just a second. So, for anybody who's unfamiliar with the idea of a tier list, what we're going to be doing is organizing things from S, A, B, C, and D tiers, S being the usually most powerful thing. In today's case, stay banned forever. A tier is going to be absolutely not now, and the B tier is going to be pretty middle of the road, so B tier. C, these cards could be unbanned, and D is for cards that are definitely okay. So we're going to be taking a look at Modern's kind of extensive ban list, and we're going card by card to see exactly which ones are good, which ones are fine, and which ones should definitely never leave jail. We're going to start off with Green Sun Zenith, and I think Green Sun Zenith is a card that only has the ability to get better and better as Modern produces more and more really powerful threats. I think the idea of Green Sun Zenith into Dryad Arbor is honestly a lot better than even playing something like, say, a Birds of Paradise, and I think that's a card that should absolutely not now, no. Keep this banned. In the future, I can see Modern getting to a point where Green Sun Zenith is just good and not oppressive, but I think now it should absolutely not be unbanned. Next, we're going to move into Sensei's Divining Top. I think Divining Top is a card that should probably stay banned forever. So the reason it was actually banned in the first place wasn't because of power level issues, even though Counterbalance is in Modern and is not banned. So you could have the Miracles combo of Counterbalance plus Top, and that would be really oppressive. But I actually just think that Top should be banned forever because it's not a very fun experience for people to be playing against. A lot of matches will be going to time because of the time spent actually using the Top. Nobody wants to play 50-minute rounds if they don't have to, and just, no thank you. No thank you to the entire experience. Next up is going to be Chrome Mox, and spoiler, I'm going to be putting basically all of the things that generate mana for 0 into the stay banned forever list, because that's what leads to some of the most powerful, crazy stuff in Modern. But there's no such thing as Force of Will in Modern, unlike Legacy, to kind of keep it all under control. So I'm going to put Chrome Mox in the stay banned forever list. I'm going to put Mox Opal in the stay banned forever list. Mox Opal, please, everybody who says unban Mox Opal, it did nothing wrong, please stop. Anyway, next we've got Clan Ironworks, or KCI. I think KCI is a very, very powerful combo engine, and the deck was very good when it was good. I do think that this is a card that could actually be unbanned one day, because the KCI decks are weak to a few different forms of hate. They're weak to artifact hates like Stony Silence and things of that nature. They're medium weak to things like Kataki. They're medium weak to things like Rest in Peace that arrest cards out of the graveyard. And they're medium weak to counter spells. And there's not very many decks that can line all of those things up together to make one good powerful hate package that's good against KCI and good against a bunch of other stuffs. Of course, Spirits can boast being one of those decks, but you know how that goes. Anyway, I think KCI is something that should absolutely not be unbanned now, but could one day see the light of day. Next up is Summer Bloom, and Summer Bloom is just one of those cards that is in jail forever because of Amulet of Vigor, and I think just making that deck go from already pretty good and near the top of the tier to absolutely unbeatable in a lot of matchups and getting a lot of turn 2 wins. I think Summer Bloom is one of those cards that, as long as Amulet of Vigor is legal, this card should actually stay unbanned. I'm sorry, should stay banned forever. It's just very powerful. The Amulet Titan deck is very, very likely to get turn 2 wins off of this thing. And it's just, no thank you. Next up is going to be Mycosynth Lattice, and Mycosynth Lattice doesn't actually do anything unless you have Karn Liberated, I'm sorry, Karn Great Creator on the table. Not Karn Liberated, that card doesn't do anything right now. Mycosynth Lattice, you know, locks down all of your opponents' things, including lands, as long as you have a Karn on the table. And there are a few decks that could take advantage of that, most notably Tron. And I actually think this is just like a B tier thing. Like, the combo is very powerful. Not being able to use any of your lands is a very strong thing to do, especially when you're able to use all of your lands and you can just start doing crazy things as early as turn 3. I still think Mycosynth Lattice is one of those cards that is banned for the correct reason, but in theory, I wouldn't cry too much if it gets unbanned. Like, we'll see what ends up happening if this card ever actually gets unbanned. But I think it's just kind of a middle-of-the-road pick. Next up is going to be Umezawa's Jitte, or Jit, if I don't know, however you feel like pronouncing it. I say Jitte. Anyway, Jitte is one of those cards that is probably one of the weaker cards on the tier list. However, if you have ever played a creature versus creature matchup and one person has a Jitte, you already understand just how powerful this interaction is. Like, the idea of Stoneforge Mystic getting Jitte against just about any creature deck, it is such an insurmountable bit of advantage that it almost makes creatures unplayable. Like, in Legacy, there was a really long time where Death and Taxes was one of the best decks because you could just resolve a Jitte against a lot of decks and they could just do absolutely nothing about it. And this card honestly blanks a lot of archetypes kind of by itself, even more so than things like Plague Engineer, and probably almost as much as Renin 6. Jitte by itself would completely invalidate things like tribal strategies. The life gain that you get off of Jitte provides crazy incentive against burn, and there's a universe in which if you do unban Jitte, you just put the Stoneforge package into the existing 4-color control deck, maybe instead of things like Icefang Quaddle. And now you have a good offensive and a good defensive thing to do in that deck. And I honestly just don't really want parts of that. I think it's one of those cards that, if it were to be unbanned, I understand why, but I think that Jitte is such an active detriment to any creature-based strategy in Modern that I don't think it should be unbanned for a pretty long time. Personal bias aside, as somebody who's, you know, a bit of a champion of playing X1 creatures, I still think this is going to be a B tier pick. Obviously, I did a lot of talking about Jitte for a B tier pick, but I think that's where I would put Jitte right now. It even could be unbanned. You know what? I'm actually going to put it in the could be unbanned, because it is definitely something that is answerable. Creatures are easier than ever to answer right now, but if you're trying to employ a creature strategy, just, I don't know, look out. Next is going to be Blazing Shoal, and this did exactly one thing. It helped the Infect deck go from just being like a relatively medium turn 3, turn 4 combo deck to being a fairly consistent turn 2 with either Glistener Elf or Inkmoth Nexus. And with all of the free creature removal that exists in Modern right now, I actually think Blazing Shoal might be okay, especially since the Shoal actually doesn't even add to toughness. You will get turn 2 sometimes by Blazing Shoal, but I still think that's okay for the format to have access to. So I'm actually going to put it here. If you're going to be playing one of the piles of Lightning Bolt, Unholy Heat decks, like say Murktide Region, even like regular Burn, there's a lot of things that are playing so much removal that they could stand up to Blazing Shoal right now. And the addition of things like Force Negation and Solitude only make this even more susceptible to removal or counterspell. So I think I like Blazing Shoal as a card that, in theory, could just get unbanned. Next up is going to be Seed of the Synod, and I'm going to group all of the artifact lands together. So, in my opinion here, we're going to put Seed of the Synod and Ancient Den as two lands that probably should stay banned forever. So, Seed of the Synod helps power out things like Thoughtcast, it helps power out things like Thought Monitor, and the 8-cast deck is already a thing in Modern. Like, you can already just play Affinity with both Thoughtcast and Thought Monitor and not be embarrassed. And that's just by playing, like, the tapped Indestructible Artifact lands. And that deck is good enough. Ancient Den, not only would Affinity play that, but also Hammer Time, where you just have that much easier access to Metalcraft for things like your copies of Puresteel Paladin. And I think that these two are easily the best of the artifact lands as far as Modern context is considered. The red one, Great Furnace, is certainly not bad, but it's not, I believe, on the same power level as these two. The Tree of Tales, Vault of Whispers, and Great Furnace, whoever that is, I think those ones should be... You know what? I'm going to go so far as to actually say that these are probably B tier bans. Like, you know what? I'm actually going to slide these even farther down. I think the non-blue, non-white artifact lands, in theory, just could get unbanned. And without access to the blue or the white lands, I think that Affinity would be a deck that is certainly powerful, but is not, like, overwhelmingly curb stomping everything to the point of not being a fun environment. I think these three could actually be unbanned, but in the non-Affinity decks, I don't know that I want these two to see the light of day. Next up is going to be Seething Song, and that's primarily a card that would see play in decks like Gift Storm. It would see play in things like Through the Breach decks that want to power out Primeval Titan in the case of Titan Shift decks, or just Through the Breach Emrakul piles. And I honestly think Seething Song is fine. Like, decks like Gift Storm and the like are honestly not great, mostly because of the addition of Force Negation to Modern, and that's not a card that existed when Seething Song was banned. So I think this is going to be something that you can totally unban, and while it is powerful, I think it's honestly fine. Like, this card is just a ritual in a world where no deck actually wants rituals, and if you do include this into a deck that could potentially want rituals, the best things that you usually get out of it are either Gift Storm starts, and Gift Storm can already win on turn 3 just fine. So I think Seething Song isn't really adding anything to that package. It's adding a little bit of power to a deck that honestly already has a bunch of power. It just is weak to a bunch of hate, and I don't think Seething Song changes that. The turn 3 Through the Breach, that is a very powerful thing, but people are already prepared for opponents casting 2 spells on turn 3. Like, the Cascade decks like Crashing Footfalls and Living End are already resolving 2 very powerful spells as early as turn 3. So this is already a thing that people are preparing for, and I don't think the addition of Seething Song into like Through the Breach is necessarily going to change that at all. So I think this is okay to be unbanned. Next up is going to be Glimpse of Nature, and Glimpse of Nature is a card that I think should not be unbanned now, the same as Green Sun Zenith, but I do think this card is powerful enough to really just need respect, because as soon as you unban a card like Glimpse of Nature, Elf Tribal just goes absolutely batshit insane. Like, Heritage Druid is Modern legal, Nettle Sentinel is Modern legal, all of the relevant elves, minus Wirewood Symbiote, are Modern legal already. So if you get to just like have your opponents glimpse and do the really powerful things, then that's not really something that you generally want to see. Like, oh, green 1 mana, draw 3 or 4 as early as turn 2 is ultra powerful and really just should not be slept on. But I don't think it is the most powerful thing that Modern has access to. With that said, if this were to be unbanned tomorrow, I would definitely make a video playing Modern Elves, because that deck is fun. Next up is Skull Clamp. Woo! Whoa! No, hard no, absolutely not. Next. Oh, no to Skull Clamp. Hard hell no to Skull Clamp. Next gonna be Punishing Fire, and honestly, Punishing Fire is fine. Like, it's one of those cards that's definitely okay. Like, creatures are already really easy to answer, and just because Punishing Fire plus Grove of the Burn Willows is repeatable doesn't mean that this is a strategy that, like, is even all that likely to beat up on creature-based strategies more than creature-based strategies already get beat up on. So, like, I don't know that anybody really gives a shit about Punishing Fire, and it don't get me wrong, this card is very good. Decks like Jund would absolutely love access to maybe 2 Punishing Fires so that they could just further lock down any opposing creature strategies, finish off planeswalkers, etc. And I still think that that's not enough of a reason to keep it banned. Like, I think it's just fine. Next up is Dark Depths, and I'm going to put Dark Depths into the list of cards that's probably just going to stay banned forever. Like, getting access to a 2020 Indestructible as early as turn 2 is not something that Modern can really handle. Like, remember, Modern doesn't have, like, Swords to Plowshares, Modern doesn't have Caracas, Modern doesn't have most of the things that... Oh, Modern doesn't have a Wasteland, duh. But Modern does have things like Vampire, Hexmage, and Thespian Stage, so that you can get very early 2020s. And I don't really think that that's something that Modern is equipped to handle, and I don't really know that that's something that Modern needs to adjust to be able to handle. So I think this one should probably just stay banned forever. Next up is Rite of Flame. Now, Rite of Flame is very different from Seething Song. Costing 1 is such a night and day difference from costing 3 that Rite of Flame actually would, unlike Seething Song, take some decks that exist or some decks that maybe even don't exist and power them up to the point of like complete unreasonability. So again, Giftstorm being probably the most prominent example, is a deck that would absolutely love access to Rite of Flame. And a lot of those turn 3 kills that you already see out of decks like Giftstorms, you know, when they're allowed to untap with Brawl and stuff, those turn into turn 2s a lot if you give them access to Rite of Flame. I don't think that's something that the format can handle. And I'm going to put this in like the very top of Absolutely Not Now. I know I'm not really ordering these. I could start ordering these, but I don't think I will. I think this is going to go to like the top of the Absolutely Not Now tier. Like, that card is just very, very degenerate, and shit gets real super fast when you have access to Rite of Flame. Next up is going to be Once Upon a Time, and this is like, what, the 7th most broken card from Throne of Eldraine? Look at it. Yeah, seriously, look at this. Like, Throne of Eldraine card, Throne of Eldraine card, Throne of Eldraine card. Good job, Magic the Gathering. Anyway, Once Upon a Time, I think, is about a B tier ban. It makes a lot of decks hilariously consistent. You get to just, obviously cast it on turn 1, you get to find a land or a creature, and you're very happy for either of those things. And decks like Tron absolutely loved having access to this, because they just literally had turn 3 Tron every single game. Didn't even have to mulligan to lower than 6 most of the time because of Once Upon a Time's consistency, and they really enjoyed their little time in the sun because of that. Also, just anything playing green loves access to this. You can play things that are like the Yorion 4-color decks would absolutely love access to Once Upon a Time, being able to get any of their pitch elementals or stabilizing their early hands with just guaranteed land drops. So I think this card is banned for the right reason, but nowhere near being the most powerful card on this list. Speaking of most powerful cards on this list, Oko. Boop! Right there. Top. Stay banned forever. You should probably never see this, see the light of day. But, to his credit, Oko should also never put on a shirt. So, there's that. Mystic Sanctuary. So, this one, honestly, I think this card is another B tier ban. Maybe even could be unbanned. It is very powerful with access to fetch lands, right? Like, you put this on top of your deck, you get to reuse things like cryptic commands, expressive iterations, whatever really powerful instant or sorcery you want to grab and make use of. It lets a lot of decks have access to things like Time Warp in their deck, so like you can Time Warp, cryptic command, bounce this, do the thing all over again, and you effectively have access to a Time Warp like every turn, and that is a really powerful thing. But I think that there's a lot of strategies that just don't really care about Mystic Sanctuary / don't give the Sanctuary players enough time to set up right now, and I think that this card, in theory, could be unbanned. I think it's more powerful than these artifact lands, but probably less than Jitte, but it is banned for the right reason, because when you do have access to Mystic Sanctuary, in your control deck, then you do get some pretty degenerate lines, and fetch lands go from already being some of the best cards in the format to just being absolutely busted because you always have to respect Mystic Sanctuary, and I do think that's an okay game to play right now. Next up is Deathrite Shaman, and oh my god, y'all complain about rags? Yo, I'm gonna need to talk to all of y'all like 20 to 23-year-old Zoomers who might not have been around for the time of Deathrite Shaman. Every single person with a fucked up hairline like myself will tell you Deathrite Shaman is better than Ragvan. That's all I got for you. Deathrite Shaman is absolutely absurd. This card should never see the light of day in Modern. Decks like Jund, like Liliana of the Veil Jund, were tier 1 because of how good Deathrite Shaman is and no other reason. Like, this card is very, very, very unreal powerful. Like, you get to just have your Polluted Delta fetch for a Watery Grave, or even worse, like a Scalding Tarn can get a Watery Grave, can get your Mana Dork. Like, you just don't have to respect the color wheel at all. You don't have to worry about anything coming out of the graveyard because of the green ability. You get a real clock because of the black ability. You don't have to worry about anything like, say, Snapcaster Mage. If Mystic Sanctuary was legal, you wouldn't have to worry about that. Deathrite Shaman solves all the problems while gaining you life, draining your opponent, and being a mana dork, all in the same one drop that effectively has no limit on the colors you can actually use to cast it, because you can always just make your mana base available for either black or green, and you don't really have to limit yourself too much. Like, just giving yourself access to, I don't know, for example, Flooded Strand can get Marsh Flats, can play your mana dork. Like, what kind of interaction is that? And yeah, Deathrite Shaman should just not be unbanned at all. Next up is Lurrus. Top. Stay banned forever. Again, not really going to order these, but Lurrus, holy shit. Like, what were they thinking with this Magic card? Like, I don't understand why this card was printed. Just, it was one of those ones that was like super clearly not play tested, and good lord, people, what were you guys thinking? Like, there's basically no decklist restriction for this card. I mean, there is, but there really isn't. And Lurrus pre-nerf is probably the single most powerful thing, including Black Lotus and Ancestral Recall, that Magic has ever actually produced. And post-nerf Lurrus is still the most powerful thing, definitely in Modern. It honestly could be the most powerful thing that you would have access to in Legacy if it weren't banned there as well. Lurrus, no. Just hard no. Tybalt's Trickery. So this is a card that leads to some unfun games, but is really, really inconsistent. And it's not even good. Like, you can get a turn to Emrakul sometimes, and that is powerful and cool. I don't know that that's good enough to like need to be banned when it's that inconsistent. I'm gonna put it here. It could be unbanned. I don't think it's definitely okay, but I think it could be unbanned. That's really all I have to say about that one. Field of the Dead. I think Field of the Dead is a card that should kind of chill in the B tier. So Field of the Dead, it would be at its best in decks like Control or decks like 4-color that have access to things like Risen Reef. So you can trigger your Risen Reefs, get lands off the top of your deck, eventually find Field of the Deads, and a deck that already has the best late game in all of Modern simply gets better at the late game. So it's like leaning more into its thing, you know? And there are decks like, say, Amulet Titan that really appreciated Field of the Dead. There's decks like just the Scape Shift Primeval Titan piles that really loved access to both Field of the Dead and Valakut, so that you had more than one land-based win condition in those decks. And I do think that Field of the Dead is a card that is on the ban list for the right reason. Like, a lot of decks had way too much inevitability when they had access to Field of the Dead, but I don't think that it's a thing that is... It's not like Lurrus, right? Like, it's not like Oko. It's just very strong. I don't think it lives up here, but it's very strong. Next up is going to be Hogak. And Hogak is another one that I'm gonna just say should probably be banned forever. So Hogak is just ridiculously good, and it's still one of the best decks in both Legacy and Vintage. So of course everybody slept on how good Hogak was in Modern, because like everybody's like, oh whatever, you can't actually pay mana for it, so it's gonna be really difficult to get out of your graveyard. And I don't know, man, people forgot that Hogak had the word dredge on it. And the last time we had access to cards that said dredge before Hogak, they were named Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. So, oh, speaking of which, here's a Treasure Cruise. Where's Dig Through Time? Here's Dig Through Time. There we go. Things that say dredge live here. We do not dredge. That's not okay. Stop it. Dredge will, I don't know, get your, or dredge, delve, will get your hand slapped by the judge and everybody else. Please no. These cards are, for some reason, allowable in Pioneer. But if Hogak is one of the best things to be doing in Vintage, it's definitely not okay for Modern. Next up is going to be Arkham's Astrolabe, and I think that's a card that should absolutely not be unbanned now, but I don't know that I would say that it lives all the way up here, right? Like, this card makes a lot of decks, especially the control decks that play Yorion, just unreal consistent, while also being close to completely immune to effects like Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon. And, oh yeah, also, like, Field of Ruin has basically no text against Arkham's Astrolabe decks. And I think this card is just, it's really good. Like, it might live here, but I'm gonna put it here. Everybody, again, kind of like slept on just how much value this card really provided until you play with it. When you play with it, holy Jesus, this thing is insane. It's just like the most subtle value, but that subtle value just wins you so many games, because like you don't have to fetch shock against decks like Burn. You basically invalidate the entire Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon strategies. Field of Ruin has almost no text against you because you can just get basics and not care. You can play Blood Moon yourself because you're playing a pile of basics. And Arkham's Astrolabe just did a lot of work for you. Like, it smoothed out your draws. Every deck went from like 60 cards to effectively 58 because, you know, you could just play a couple fewer lands but play a playset of Arkham's Astrolabe because your deck is just that smooth. Like, you just don't have to worry about anything. And I don't know that that's really something that should be allowed. Next up is going to be Splinter Twin, and this is going to be one of the hotter takes here. Splinter Twin, I think Splinter Twin lives here. I think it's definitely okay. So Splinter Twin does have a lot of ability to kind of invalidate entire strategies, right? Like, if you play Splinter Twin, your opponent always has to respect your combo. They always have to be on their toes against things like Deceiver Exarch, Pestermite, or even, what's the other one, like Village Bellringer, I guess, if you want to play white. But either way, Splinter Twin effects, just, it's really good. Like, I think this card is something that would definitely see play in Modern, but I actually don't know that in a format that has both Solitude and Force Negation, that Splinter Twin is really the be-all end-all that it was back in like 2016. I think it is just a card that would totally produce a solid strategy, and that strategy might even make its way all the way up to tier 1 at some point. But I don't think that Splinter Twin would, like, you know, ruin the format. I don't think anybody should be doing The Simpsons, won't you please think of the children? I don't think we need to be doing any of that when we talk about Splinter Twin. I think it's just a solid card. Next up is Ayavugan. Yeah, no. So there's, to my knowledge, only been one really big unban, what is it called, no ban list Modern tournament, and that was held by Star City Games back in, I don't know, like 2019 or 2018 or something like that. And I think like 7 of the top 8 decks were Ayavugan based Eldrazi strategies that just played all colorless stuff, right? Like, so you played like Ayavugan, what's the Eldrazi land called? Eldrazi Temple, and just a giant pile of colorless lands so that you could just Eldrazi Mimic on turn 1, 2 or 3 times if you had them. You could Thought Knot Seer on turn 2, and your opponent's life was generally pretty miserable from there, right? And that's definitely something that would immediately come back to Modern if that was something that we had access to. And the deck's really fast. Like, you get to play things like Urborg so that your Eye of Ugins tap for mana, giving you access to like Matter Reshaper on turn 3 pretty easily. Because you were playing things like Ugin, you also had access to just casting Chalice of the Void really easily. And I think that this deck is a little bit too oppressive to be anywhere near Modern for, I don't know, ever. Next up is going to be Second Sunrise, and this is only in one deck, and that's going to be the Eggs combo deck. So the Eggs combo deck wasn't banned because it's too powerful, it was banned because it fucking sucks to play against. And like, there was one tournament where, I don't remember who the opponent was, I want to say it was Brian Kibler, somebody correct me in the comments if it wasn't him, but Second Sunrise started going off, and the opponent literally took a sheet of paper, wrote F6 on it, showed it to the camera, put it down, and went away. And they went to, I don't know, use the bathroom, get a snack, do something, whatever it is they were doing. And when they came back like 15 minutes later, the Eggs player was still comboing off. Like, the deck took that long to execute. And that's not really something that's ever healthy for a format. We don't want to see that as part of a format. And I think it was correct to just ban Second Sunrise, get rid of the Eggs deck altogether, you know, tell that whole strategy to kind of fuck itself. And I think I'm okay with that. So it's not the most powerful thing by any means, but it is a really, really big negative play experience. So I think this correctly is on the ban list, and I'm going to put it right in the B tier. Next up is going to be Cloud Post. And Cloud Post is a card that creates crazy amounts of mana very early. The Locust strategy is a lot more stable than you would think it is, given the number of Locusts that actually exist. Like, there's only Cloud Post and Glimmer Post, and then you can Vesuva them for just more copies of Cloud Post or Glimmer Post as you need. And that's a deck that sees Fringe Legacy play now. Like, that's a thing that already exists. Like, you have access to cards like Candelabra of Tawnos, you have cards like Primeval Titan that see play to get more Cloud Posts, and then they finish you off with giant things like Eldrazi, like Ugin the Spirit Dragon, just all kinds of cards that we already don't like seeing in big mana in Modern. And if you think Tron is powerful, whew, Cloud Post, let me tell you, Tron is good. Cloud Post is some bullshit. And I'm gonna put that actually all the way up here. Like, Cloud Post is no, I'm gonna put it here. It should still absolutely not be unbanned now, but it's good, y'all. If you haven't watched the Legacy Cloud Post video, go find one. The deck's good. Next up is going to be Ponder and Preordain, and I'm actually pretty glad that they're right next to each other. So Ponder and Preordain are close to the same type of effect, where you get to sculpt out your draws, make them a lot more consistent than they are, and you just get to churn through your deck with relative ease. And every single card that's in your deck just becomes infinitely easier to see because Ponder and Preordain help smooth out your draws all the time. And that's why they see a lot of Legacy play. You know, you have access to cards like Brainstorm and Ponder, and to a much lower extent Preordain in Legacy, and people call them the Cantrip Cartel because they are that good. They run everything. And I think Ponder is a card that should probably stay banned forever. Like, blue decks become so consistent with access to Ponder that it is almost not worth your time to try to play like a fair game against any deck that sees Ponder. And that's been true in Legacy for years. Like, you know, Ponder and Brainstorm smooth your draws out so much that even your one-ofs are cards that you can almost reliably expect to see in your Legacy decks because of how smooth you get to draw. And Preordain to a lesser extent. So only one of these is restricted in Vintage, that would be Ponder. And Preordain, while it is very good and should probably not be unbanned now, it's not on the same power level as Ponder, but both of these cards are very, very strong. Next up is going to be Birthing Pod. And I think Birthing Pod is a card that should absolutely not be unbanned right now. It's just good. Birthing Pod's just strong. Like, as early as, what, turn 2? You can start, like, chaining Birthing Pods into ridiculous stuff. Like, what is it? It's, Birds of Paradise plays Birthing Pod chucks Birds of Paradise, you get a whatever the corridor monitor, yes, corridor monitor, that costs to untap your birthing pod away the corridor monitor, go get a Renegade Rallier brings back your corridor monitor, untap the birthing pod. You get the idea. So like, it just chains itself so easily to almost your dealer's choice of infinite damage, infinite life, lots of combo kills, wipe your opponent's entire board, draw your deck. Like, you can just do whatever you want with a birthing pod, and literally all you need most of the time is simply for the card to resolve. And I think that that's not really a place where Modern wants to be. Like, one card combos are a bit too much if you ask me. And the fact that birthing pod decks also just got to play like a decent fair game is, I think, a little bit too much. Like, when birthing pod was a deck, you always had to respect the combo, a lot of the same as you did with Splinter Twin, except birthing pod's fair game was infinitely better than Splinter Twin's fair game. Splinter Twin at the time was just kind of stuck playing like this blue-red tempo control deck that happened to have a combo finisher, and to be fair, that was pretty good. Like, you got to play things like Lightning Bolts, what were the counterspells back then? Mana Leak / Remand, because you didn't have actual counterspell. Force of Negation didn't exist. Archmage's Charm didn't exist. So you don't have all of the really crazy tools that you have access to now, right? Like, there's no Ragavan, there's no Murktide Regent. So Splinter Twin decks back in 2016 had an okay control deck that finished out with a really strong combo, and that was respectable. Birthing Pod just got to play like this really solid green-based creature strategy that could just beat you down. And if you were playing some control deck, then you had to really worry about whether you were going to die to just the creature part of the game plan, or if you were ever dumb enough to tap out for something, is Birthing Pod just going to infinite you right off the back? And that's something that people really needed to consider, and I think the more creatures that get printed, the better Birthing Pod gets. Like, this card is not exactly decreasing in power level as they print more creatures. So I think this is one that should absolutely not be unbanned now. Matter of fact, I'm actually going to put it way up here. I'm going to put it into stay banned forever. One card combos, please no. Oh, Gataxian Probe, a Yu-Gi-Oh card. So that's not really a joke. So I joked all the time, especially like way back when this card was spoiled and printed and we were playing it in New Phyrexia and basically everything because it's that powerful. Like, Gataxian Probe is a freaking Yu-Gi-Oh card. Like, there's a card called Upstart Goblin, which is effectively the reverse of Gataxian Probe. Like, you look at your opponent's hand, you draw a card, but instead of you losing 2 life, your opponent gains 1,000 life, and that's effectively the same thing, right? Like, helping your opponent is a lot less of a downside than hurting yourself, but you have so much free information. You churn through your deck, you're putting a card in your graveyard. Your deck is 56 cards instead of 60 because Gataxian Probe doesn't actually cost mana, just 2 points of life. And against every deck that's not actual burn, a card like Gataxian Probe is so unbelievably powerful that you just don't even mind a 2 life, basically ever. Next is going to be Mental Misstep. Oh my fucking god, no. Yeah, that's... I'm just gonna move along. So, Simian Spirit Guide. So, Simian Spirit Guide is a card that I don't believe should be unbanned anytime soon. I don't know that I would put it up here because unlike cards like Mox Opal and Chrome Mox, you do only get the mana the one time. And now that we have access to things like Force of Negation, Solitude, Subtlety, a lot of free interaction, I think Simian Spirit Guide is more tolerable now than it has been in the past. But that does not mean I think it's okay. I think it is simply more tolerable than back then. That's it. That's all you get out of me. Downside. I'm actively suggesting that we keep a spirit card banned, so I don't know, against the brand. But yeah, Simian Spirit Guide, no, absolutely not. Again, free mana is just super powerful in Modern. There's no force of will to keep shit reined in. So the better spells and decks get, the more powerful a card like Simian Spirit Guide can be, and we just don't really need parts of that. Next up is Faithless Looting. Nope. So Faithless Looting is another card that just it enables all of the graveyard-based decks to just be so hilariously consistent that it's almost not worth your time to play anything else. And that was true back when Faithless Looting was allowed in Dredge. That was true when Faithless Looting was allowed in the Hogak decks. And this was really the glue that, that kept all of those decks held together. Faithless Looting is like the reason that those decks were able to win at such a clip, even though Hogak was printed at the same time as Force of Negation. Like, one of those things was clearly more powerful than the other. And having access to a Hogak deck without something like Faithless Looting to really make the draws kind of go boom, or to give yourself a relatively healthy mulligan. I don't think that Hogak is anywhere near as good as it is if you have access to if you don't have access to Faithless Looting. Not to say that Hogak isn't super powerful, because the card's dumb as shit, but Faithless Looting is definitely the reason that those decks were as consistent as they are. And, oh, speaking of which, Golgari Grave Troll. So, I'm going to put this card as an absolutely not now. I don't know that I'm going to put it here. No, I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it here. That's a lie. So, Golgari Grave Troll is a card that they thought they could unban, and how long did that actually last? If anybody in the comments knows, let me know how long the unban of Golgari Grave Troll lasted. I think it was like 3 weeks, where they thought Grave Troll was gonna be okay, right? And they were like, hey, let's go ahead and unban Grave Troll. We think Dredge is bad enough right now to the point where you can actually give the deck another good enabler and then see how consistent it was. Well, hindsight is 2020, and it tells us that that was a major fuck up. Like, Golgari Grave Troll just made the Dredge decks so consistent that you were just basically fighting Modern versus Legacy all the time if you were playing not Dredge against Dredge. And they immediately banned that card again, and I think it's actually the only card that's ever been unbanned and then banned again in Modern. So let me know if that's true. Let me know if that's not true. Am I capping, or am I remembering correctly? But Golgari Grave Troll, absolutely no thank you. Not happening. No. Next up is going to be Uro. And Uro is... This might be a hot take, y'all, but I actually think Uro is like a B tier right now. So hear me out. Uro is already a control finisher, right? And it's easily the best control finisher. No arguing that. We know that. That's almost an indisputable fact. Almost. You can always dispute anything. Up to and including Uro for just one. But Uro is one of those cards that it requires a lot of setup, right? Like, it requires a spell to resolve, it requires you to actually be alive over the course of not affecting the board for the 2 turns that you're playing Uro, or playing/escaping Uro, and it's a blue spell in a format that actively wants to be playing Mystical Dispute, and it relies on the graveyard. So you can do a lot of things about Uro, but Uro is still the best finisher available to control decks in all kinds of formats. Like, Uro literally sees vintage play. It's that good. And I think that this card is one of those ones that it does a very good job at helping set up with the first cast, right? Like, you gain 3 life, you draw a card, you can get a land from your hand onto the table, and that's really powerful. And the escape, still really powerful. Every time it attacks, it does something you want it to be doing. So, like, Uro is just stupid powerful as far as control finishers go. But I actually think that Uro would be mostly fine to allow into Modern, with the caveat that the current 4-color control deck in some form goes away. If you were to just play like some Bant or Sultai or even Teamer-based control shell right now that happens to have Uro as a finisher, that deck would be good right now. But I think if you put Uro into the current 4-color control shell that's all over Modern, then yeah, that deck is borderline untouchable. It's already really good, and it's already probably the best deck in Modern, but it becomes straight up untouchable if you have access to Uro. I'm not arguing that. What I am saying is that in the grand scheme of things, Uro is not the most powerful thing that is on Modern's ban list. It is very strong, but I don't think it's worse than, for example, like Summer Bloom, which guarantees a deck a lot of turn 2 wins. Like, I don't think it's as bad as like Luris, because, well, nothing's as bad as Luris. I don't think it's as oppressive as a Hogak, but Uro is very good, and I think it is on the ban list for the right reason. Actually, I'm going to slide this up here. I'm going to slide it up to absolutely not now, because with the way Modern is right now, it just slots into the control deck that's already the best control deck. So I think it should not be unbanned now. Next up is Dread Return. Free spells. Hypergenesis. So Hypergenesis is actually part of the reason why this video is being made. And like I said, it was Andrea Mengucci versus Canister. We're playing Hypergenesis / Splinter Twin against a bunch of decks, and people are already prepared for Cascade. Like, people are already playing Flusterstorm, they're already playing Chalice for Zero, they're already playing cards like Lavinia, Thalia, Deafening Silence, Archon of Emeria, all kinds of things to make it so that you just can't cast 2 spells at the same time. And cards like Solitude help make it so that when you do resolve something crazy like Hypergenesis, it's not necessarily guaranteed to be absurd. It's powerful. Nope, again, this is not something that anybody's arguing against. It's definitely powerful, maybe even more so than Crashing Footfalls, but the deck that surrounds Hypergenesis sucks, and that's kind of where this deck fell off. So I think this is actually an okay unban. You get to do a super cool, powerful thing, but it happens to be a super cool, powerful thing that everybody's already prepared for. Again, people are already trying to beat Living End. They're already trying to beat Crashing Footfalls. So the fact that Hypergenesis is a Cascade spell actually hurts it more than helps it, if you ask me. And our last card here is going to be Bridge from Below. And Bridge from Below, I think, is going to be in the absolutely not now pile. So that's going to be a card that is just, again, decks like Dredge can just use this card so efficiently, even without the legacy tools, right? Like, you don't have to have a Cabal Therapy to have something like Bridge from Below be absurdly powerful. Remember that in even like a Fairish deck, that Goblin Bombardment, for example, just got reprinted into Modern. So if you wanted to do something like Bridge from Below plus Goblin Bombardment, that's a deck that we used to see play in Legacy, the Sam Black Bombardment deck. That was a real thing. Shit, I actually played that and top 8'd a couple of things with it. It was sweet. But I think that's a card that should absolutely not be unbanned now. But doing it like this, we have a little bit more of a clear picture of the Modern ban list and where I think the Modern ban list kind of should live. And I actually think this is a pretty big point for Wizards. So a lot of the cards that should stay banned forever are already banned. Like, they made the right choices there. Like, we should not have access to things that are as powerful as like Luris or Oko or Deathrite Shaman, right? A lot of the cards that are absolutely not now, these are just very powerful cards, all of which make things go degenerate, or in the case of Preordain, make things extremely stable. And there are some cards that are definitely okay to be unbanned, at least if you ask me. And I think a lot of these cards are just fine. Like, you could insert them into Modern right now, and they might not even have that much of an impact. And that was just proven by Canister and by Andrea Mengucci when they played decks like Splinter Twin and Hypergenesis against the current Modern field. Like, a deck like Hypergenesis is just not beating a deck with Flusterstorms in it. And that was something that we kind of had to learn the hard way by, you know, having access to those two content creators making the videos, giving the time to play the matches, and seeing exactly how they line up against the current format. And, well, the truth is, they don't. So I think these cards could totally be unbanned and would probably be fine. But that's going to be my take on the Modern ban list. So, as always, let me know what your arguments are in the comments. Do you like my ban list? Do you think you would shift a couple of cards up or down? Do you hate Second Sunrise and KCI so much that you think they should stay banned forever? Let me know. Either way, as always, if you like what you're watching, make sure to click like on the video and let me know. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. I'd love to see more of y'all. Also, I'll see y'all on the next one.